Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session, we are doing some collegiate coverage. We're not going to do an updated tier list today, though I will briefly show what my updated tier list would look like. The reason we're not doing an updated tier list is there really isn't a need to do so. No one in the top four tiers has really moved. Some teams based on the eyeball test might look a little stronger or weaker. Bellevue, I would be talking about you. Um, but ultimately, no matches have happened that have moved anyone in these tiers around. There's been some movement down here. You can compare to last week's tier list if you like. It is listed in the description down below there. Okay, so let's go ahead and cover what we are covering today, which is going to be we're looking at the 7-1 teams because for people who aren't familiar with this, don't know how this one works, what's going to happen is the top 32 teams are going to move on to a group stage. They'll do 4 different groups, and then the top 2 teams for each of those will come out. But to get into that group stage, you've got to be top 32 at the end of this. And the way that's worked in the past at least has been, hey, you're going to obviously, if you manage to maintain a perfect record 10-0, there are 5 weeks of Swiss. Next week we're skipping, but then it'll be back on. So there are 5 weeks of Swiss play, and you play 2 matches. You get your 2 matches for the week picked based on what your record is. So if you're 2-0 at the end of week 1, you're going to get matched against 2 other 2-0 teams for week 2. So you may play a team that's 2-0 and beat them, and then play a team that's 3-0 and beat them, or you might play a team that's 2-0 and beat them, and a team that is then 2-1 and beat them, or lose to them, or whatever the case may be. So obviously, you're gonna make it into group stages if you're 10-0. There are 290 teams in the bracket this time, in the Swiss bracket. 10-0 teams will obviously make it. 9-1 teams will certainly make it as well. And then 8 and 2 teams will probably mostly make it. I would expect that they'll all make it based on what we've seen in previous times, but ultimately depends on how things work out there, how many teams you work with trading, etc. And then 7-3 is usually a dice roll. Last season, what happened is all of the 8-2 teams made it, and a single 7-3 team made it, and that 7-3 team had to Iron Man their way through like 26 different teams or something like that, single elimination, to actually finally make it into the playoffs to break that 26 or whatever way tie. So you don't want to be 7-3. You want to be 8-2 or better if you have playoff aspirations in Overwatch Collegiate here. So what we're going to do is we know that these top 4 teams here at this point in the series are pretty well established. They've all beat teams that are good teams. We're not really worried about them. We would expect all of these teams to make it, but we still have quite a few 7-1 teams, as you see I'm scrolling through here. And those aren't all going to stick. Some of those 7-1 teams are going to go on, continue. Maybe they'll even go 9-1, depending on how the matches go out. Maybe they'll go ahead and get 8-2. That would kind of be the expected outcome for some of them. But some of them are going to fall and pick up 2 more losses. And then playoffs, or group stages rather, is totally up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen to them. So as a little for fun thing, or maybe to make enemies, who knows, we're going to go through this and we're going to see which of these 7-1 teams are soft. And what I mean by soft is they haven't really had meaningful wins. And meaningful wins at this point in this specific tournament are going to be wins over a team that is also 7-1. That's really what we're looking for. Obviously, if you've beat teams that have 2 losses, there's no guarantee, or there's no real strong feeling of security that you're going to be beating the other 7-1 teams when you get matched with them in not this coming weekend, but the following weekend here. So let's take a look. We're going to go through these. We're going to see what the strength of these teams that are 7-1 is, what their support is for moving on to the next round. And as I scrolled through these teams here, that's okay, we can see that there are currently 14 7-1 teams. And again, many of these teams will make it to group stage, but some of the 6-2 teams will likely push through and get 8-2 records as well and make it on there. So we'll see what happens. There's not enough room for everyone. If you went through 7-2, 8-0, and 6-2 teams, obviously we are currently at quite a few more than the 32 that will make it. As you can see, we're still scrolling, and we are at looks like 52 teams that are 6-2. A little bit more than that. Looks like 53 teams that are 6-2 there. So they obviously won't make it. We're going to look at the 7-1s because that's a more digestible thing and the more likely ones to make the playoffs at this point. So let's start with, we've opened up all these guys. Let's start with Harrisburg, because Harrisburg is currently, based on how these guys do their calculations, they wouldn't be next on my power rankings, but based on how they do their calculations, they come out in the 5 spot here. And we see Harrisburg has a win against Waldorf, which is a 6-2 team. UC Irvine, which is 7-1, UC Santa Cruz, which is 7-1. These guys are safe. They have beaten other 7-1 teams. They've given a couple of those 7-1 teams their losses. They are perfectly happy. They should be quite comfortable to make it in. Definitely not a soft 7-1. So then we move on to Bay State. We see Waldorf. We know again Waldorf is 6-2. We see they've beat KSU Black, and KSU Black is currently 7-1. And then they've beat Rebel Gaming, who is 6-2. So again, they've beat a 7-1 team. They've got a couple 6-2 teams behind that. If they beat a 7-1 team, we're going to call them not soft by how we're currently calculating this. Cool. So then we move on to Waterloo. And just to show you guys what I'm talking about here, we've gone through these. Waterloo is next here. Waterloo. Well, Waterloo beat Winthrop, and if we look at Winthrop, Winthrop is currently in the 7-1 list. So, okay, they beat a 7-1 team. They should be in pretty good state. They also beat Ohio State. That's another 7-1 team. Should be in pretty good shape. We're pretty happy with Waterloo here. They look pretty real. Then we're going to move on to Winthrop, who we just talked about, took their loss to Waterloo. And then we get into their wins. And their wins, obviously, they have 7 of them. They're 7-1, but their 2 most meaningful wins are against OU Crimson and University of Hawaii, Manoa, whatever. I'm butchering that. Both of these teams have 2 losses. These are both 6-2 teams. So that doesn't really make us confident. It's certainly better than having your wins being over 5-3 teams, your 2 most meaningful wins. But if your 2 most meaningful wins are over 6-2 teams, that doesn't necessarily show yet that you deserve to be playing with the 7-1 players. So I'd be a little concerned in this spot of, are you vulnerable? Are you going to not just potentially take 1 loss in your next weekend of competitive play where you'll have to play 2 matches against likely other 7-1 teams, but are you in danger of potentially taking 2? And this would be the first team that, based on their play in the Activision Blizzard Collegiate Homecoming Tournament, has some concern here. Then we move on to Miami, Ohio, Redhawks here, and we see that they took their loss to UT Dallas. Okay. They have a win against Utah. Utah is a 7-1 team. They're good to go. We can get them out of here. I'm not going to say they're safe. Anyone can lose 2 matches, but they've proven that they can play with the 7-1 teams because they've already beat a 7-1 team. Great. So let's go ahead and get them out of here. Next, we're up against KSU Black, and when we see KSU Black here, we're going to see they have a win against UMN Pizza Pirates and New York Ultraviolets. Okay, so I believe that's Minnesota Pizza Pirates and Ultraviolets. So the problem that we run into here is this is even weaker than Winthrop in that the Pizza Pirates have 3 losses and the Ultraviolets also have 3 losses. Now, they lost to Bay State, and Bay State's a good team, but they haven't shown us any wins that are better than that. Actually, let me double check Michigan varsity here. Sorry, I thought I'd done all my homework. It's possible. Oh, no, they have a win against Michigan. So that's a little bit better. We can replace one of those. We can replace one of these 2 teams, either Minnesota or New York, with a win against a team that has 2 losses here. I can tell you that the rest of these schools will have more than 2 losses. I don't even have to click in. I just missed Michigan there. So they're in a situation where we're going to put Pizza Pirates with 2 losses and Michigan with 3 losses are their best wins. Which, that's even less reassuring than what we had from Winthrop here, where at least their best 2 wins both only had 2 losses to their names. Next, we're going to go ahead and move on to UCLA, and UCLA 7-1, and it looks like their loss was to Bellevue. No big deal there, as we see on the leaderboards. Bellevue is currently ranked number 2. They're one of the 4 8-0 teams. Like I said, they're looking good, but they did have anyway. We'll talk about that another time. Until Bellevue actually beat someone above them, I'm not really going to move them. But yes, they probably deserve to be higher based on the strength that they're showing. Anyway, the point that we're getting back to here is they have this. Excuse me. We're on UCLA. They have the loss to Bellevue. Their wins are going to be against Longhorn Gaming, who have 2 losses, and Illinois Blue with 2 losses. And we can actually also look at UC Rolled with 2 losses. So that's a third team that I'm putting in there. But unlike a lot of these other schools, where they can only find 2 teams with 2 losses, and that's the best they can do. As we go worse, it just gets worse. They've actually beaten 3 different teams with 2 losses. So that's maybe a little bit more reassuring. That's not like, oh yeah, we're definitely safe, because you still haven't beat a team with only 1 loss. You still haven't given a team their only loss. You haven't really played with your brethren, the sort of like and like there. So we'd like to see stronger, but we're going to leave them in this soft category. They might be on the stronger side of soft, but from what we've seen in this tournament, we're going to leave them there. Then we've got Utah. A bit surprising to see them in this list, but it's been a bit surprising to see a few in this list. And as we go through Utah, Overwatch 1, great name, is going to be a team that has 2 losses. TU Hurricanes have 2 losses, and CU Boulder have 2 losses. So they're in very much the same boat. Their losses to the Red Hawks, another team that is in our top 10 list, is also a 7-1 team. But they're going to be here, and they again are in a situation where, hey, they've got 3 wins against teams with only 2 losses. That's going to count for something, but it is not enough to get you out of the soft list at this point. Finally, we move on to Ohio State. Not finally. We're on to Ohio State. They are a 7-1 team. We see that they've beat the Ultraviolets, the Pete's Pirates. We've seen those names before. They beat Akron. And Akron is another 7-1 team, but they did lose to Waterloo, who was also a 7-1 team. So they're going to be in the safe category. They beat a 7-1 team. That's going to be enough to put them in our not soft category. Of course, they're not truly safe. No one is truly safe. Anyone can go lose 2 matches from here. But they've shown they've been able to beat another team that is 7-1. They've mixed it up in here. They're probably not on their way to 2 more losses in the next weekend. That said, this is even better news for Waterloo, because Waterloo beat Ohio, who beat Akron. Both of them are 7-1 teams. Cool. Off our soft team list. Akron, unfortunately, their wins are going to be against CU Boulder with 2 losses, Georgia Tech with 2 losses. Those are both teams that, have 2 losses. We don't have anything in here that has less than 2 losses other than Ohio State, who beat them. So that's going to be a bit of a problem for them. They're going to have to stay on our in danger list. As we continue through here, again, a bit of a surprise. Well, not a surprise. We see UC Irvine here. They are 7-1, and we see that they have the loss to Harrisburg. No big surprise there. And then we see that they've got Penn State, which is going to be right here. Penn State only has 2 losses, and University of Massachusetts Minutemen, those guys have 3 losses. Okay, so they're still in danger. Now, we know perhaps historically this team might be perfectly safe, but according to how we laid this out, we're going to look at this and say this team is in danger. They haven't proven in this tournament, in this season, that they can tackle, and they could be on their way to 2 more losses here. They're not on their way to 2 more losses, but that's okay. Boise State. Well, we look at them, and we've got something very, very similar. They beat Ball State, so now Ball State has 2 losses, and then their next best win is against Rit Orange, which, unfortunately, Rit Orange here has 3 losses, so they could potentially be in some danger. They haven't beaten a 7-1 team. They haven't proved that they belong here. Yes, of course, it's in some ways better to have your loss to a better team, which UT Dallas is. UT Dallas, as we see in our rankings, sits up here in the top 5 to 6, which is great. You would go, hey, it's better to have your loss to that than to have not lost to anyone below that. That's what you want to do. But you haven't won against anyone that really is high on our list either. So this is trouble for them, potentially. Could mean, hey, are these guys cruising for 2 more losses in the next week? No, they're not. But based on our methodology, maybe they are. UC Santa Cruz. As we move on to UC Santa Cruz, we see that their losses to Harrisburg. They have a win against SCAD. That's a very important win. That was a closely contested match in predictions and such, as coaches were going, which team is going to win between these two? Anyway, tangent. And then they've got Rit Orange. So we know Rit Orange here is going to be a 3-loss team, and SCAD is a 2-loss team. Obviously, one of those losses coming from UC Santa Cruz here. This is always the case when they're in your win category. So again, hey, they've got 2 losses category and they've got 3 losses category. Not safe team. Some people are high on this team, but based on our methodology, they're not safe. They haven't proven in this tournament that they're good to go of the opponents that they're likely to run into here. And then this is our last 7-1 team. No, that's not our last 7-1 team. My apologies. Okay, Mystery Machine is our last 7-1 team. I don't actually know which school this is. That's fine. I don't actually think it matters what school this is, because as we go through Mystery Machine, they've done something a little interesting. Mystery Machine went and lost their first round match, and WPI Made in Worcester has since gone 3-5. So this is probably them doing a little bit of manipulation where they tried to lose a match early so that they would have, because it reseeds every 2 matches, they tried to lose a match early. This is my guess. Maybe they just had an absence, but if you lose a match early, you can set it up so that now you are going to, if you're 1-1, you're going to now go against the 1-1 teams for your next 2 matches. And then you win both of those, and now you're going to go against the 3-1 teams for your following 2 matches. And now you're 5-1 because the good teams haven't dropped yet. You sort of avoid the other good teams for the early part of the bracket if you take an intentional loss. Sort of the exact opposite of what Northeastern got. Oh no, I'm not salty about it. When Northeastern, because they kept doing well and because they got hard matches early, then in week 3 went ahead and found themselves against Northwood, and in week 4 went ahead and found themselves against Redbirds. Those are the 2 best teams in collegiate. So Northeastern would be in a situation where they've already got 2 losses and can't afford any more, literally can't. Whereas these guys went, hey, we're going to take an early loss to give ourselves this path that's a little bit easier on the way through. Obviously, that puts them sort of down in the rankings when it comes to some of the tiebreaker stuff that Game Battles tells us how it calculates tiebreakers, but it does sort of give them a nice easy path through there until they catch up in record to people who are more similar to them in level, because these were not that. These were easy wins for them, I'm sure. I would expect that these were easy wins until this last week here where they had UC Davis and Kent State Varsity, and if we look at those, UC Davis has 2 losses. I know one of those is from Northeastern, so the other would be from these guys because Northeastern caught them in week 2. And Kent State has 3 losses. So these guys are weird, but we definitely leave them in the soft category, where they are in a situation where, hey, their best win is against a team with 2 losses, next best is one with 3 losses, and they took a loss, perhaps intentionally, or maybe it was just a scheduling issue and they had to forfeit or something. I don't know. To a team that is 3-5. So that could hurt them, or it could have been the right way to find their way through the tournament. Obviously, if you think you can win everything, you don't resort to those shenanigans. You just try to win everything. But if you're playing for a mid-tier finish, you're playing for barely making the playoffs, you sometimes get into that little game. Okay. So that's them. And as we've gone through this, we've now cut this down from 14 teams that were 7-1 to 9 teams that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Did I miss one of those? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Did I miss one of those? Did I not close one of these? Mystery Machine. Santa Cruz, Boise, Irvine, Akron, Utah, should be UCLA, KSU, Winthrop. Oh, got it. I just missed this one. I forgot I had this tier list open. Okay, so we went down. My apologies for the delay there. We went down from 14 teams that are in our 7-1 category down to 9 teams that don't have wins over another 7-1 team. And some of those are going to be because, most of those, in fact, are going to be because they lost to very good teams. Obviously, this one lost to another 7-1 team, but some of these, for example, we can look at UCLA here is going to be because they lost to Bellevue. Nothing to scoff at there. Or Utah because they lost to Miami, Ohio. Very good team. Or Irvine because they lost to Harrisburg. Some of those losses are going to look better than some of the losses to others who are in the 7-1 category, like Ohio State here. So we're down to this, and these would be sort of the first tier of teams that you'd be worried about could pick up 2 more losses in the next weekend of play and effectively miss or have to go through, a multi-way tie that they'd potentially have to play their way through. So these teams could potentially be in trouble. That said, I think we should probably apply a legacy, scrim strength, whatever filter to this because a couple of these teams, I would be shocked if they went 0-2 in the next week. And if I remove those teams, and you guys obviously can make your own decisions on whether this is fair or not, but if I go through here, I am not worried about Utah picking up 2 losses. It could certainly happen. Brackets can be weird, but I'm not worried about Utah picking up 2 more losses out of 2 matches here. I'm likewise not worried about Irvine, whose only losses to Harrisburg here, picking up 2 more losses. And then finally, Boise, it seems unlikely that they would pick up 2 more losses here. Yeah, there's their loss being here to Dallas. So I'm going to, just sort of as a reality thing, remove those 3. But I'm really not going to remove more than that because I'd say all 6 of these teams that are left could be in some danger. If I were to split these teams again, I think we could look at this from a strength filter again and say that Santa Cruz, with their win over SCAD there, that actually was an important matchup, but probably Santa Cruz, UCLA, and Winthrop are probably the better 3 based on what we've seen, based on the importance of the matches that they've won, than the remaining 3. But I'm not going to cut it down more than this because remember, there's only 32 slots to get into group stage, and the reality is, while we looked heavily at the 7-1 teams today, some of these 6-2 teams are also not going to drop any more matches, and things are going to get confusing, and it's going to get like that. So it's not like, only 3 of these teams are going to miss. Potentially more of these teams are going to miss, and these 7-1 teams are going to have to play each other. And if we first removed the ones who cleanly didn't have any 7-1 threats, and then we removed a couple that are left there, some of these teams are likely going to catch 2 teams that they can't beat. And these would be the teams that I'd be most worried about that for. That said, this is all based on how they did so far. Teams can get better as the season goes on. There was a weekend off coming up, and everyone may train over these next 2 weeks, or some teams may train over these next 2 weeks, while other teams take a break, look a little sluggish coming off, whereas others really hit the gas and look great. So obviously, these are basically power ranking type territory. It's all just for fun. This one, we were just looking at the Homecoming Collegiate. We were not looking at the total breadth of people's seasons across other tournaments, other leagues, things like that. But that's what we had. If people have questions, comments, etc., please do throw them up in chat, as I'm happy to talk collegiate Overwatch for another couple minutes here. If you guys are enjoying this type of content, please do drop a like, consider subscribing if you haven't already done so, and if you'd like to see more collegiate content like this, please do leave comments. I'm enjoying doing collegiate content like this. I think collegiate content like this needs a home, and I might be part of that ecosystem. Speaking of which, if you're a collegiate coach for, say, a top 32 team or so, why don't you go ahead and reach out to me if you're potentially interested in coming on, and we can do talk show host type thing. I'll bring you on. We'll do a little bit of an interview. We'll talk about, hey, what's your team look like? What do things look like? What's your hardest match looked like? How did you think you were going to get through it? What's your style? How's your program look? Things like that, where we can sort of get the general population, people who are interested in watching collegiate Overwatch, some level of information and interest, and continue to build up the scene there, as well as your program and mine. But hey, okay. So yeah, let's catch up on chat. Anton Paris says UW alum representing University of Washington. They are currently in the 6-2 category. We can pull them up real quick if you want, just to see how they're doing. University of Washington are currently 6-2. Their losses are to Bellevue, perfectly respectable, and then Waldorf, another solid team. Both of those teams are currently, we've got Waldorf in our top 10 and Bellevue down here in our making moves category. What was that? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Bellevue's almost certainly going to move up, but we'll ultimately see there. I haven't moved them because they haven't won another match yet. And they were being hard stopped effectively by a loss to this team. We've since learned that this team was running, it played in a tournament and it beat them, but it was running with a tank that was, or with a player that was not from their school. That said, we are using this to hold them back here until they win against someone above them, because people ahead of them, specifically I believe it was Miami, Ohio, but I'd have to check my notes. You know what? I'll just check my notes. No, it was Boise. I want to say Boise. Sorry, confirming, guys. Boise did beat that team even if they had an illegal roster. So that's why these guys are being held back. Could they be over here? Sure, they could be over here, but we don't really know. It's tier listing. It's not perfect. That's what we go with. Okay. 23, let's go. You guess Nebraska is something besides corn. They're not currently number one. Currently, Northwood is number one on this. The reality is everyone knows Redbirds is the number one team. Redbirds has just had a relatively easy path through. If we look at Redbirds, the reason Northeastern caught Redbirds in this last weekend is because Redbirds had the least meaningful wins. If you look through this until this weekend, none of these wins are remotely meaningful. So the tournament was calculating them as the weakest at the time 6-0 team. And Northeastern was calculated because Northeastern has had hard rounds since week 2, and that Northeastern, hard is relative, obviously speaking, but since Northeastern in week 2 caught UNT, who I believe are now also 6-2, and esports at UC Davis, who I think we also determined were 6-2. Right. So Northeastern was beating teams that have since become 6-2 since week 2, whereas most people weren't running into that caliber of team until week 3. And that was just random chance that Northeastern got some hard matches early and Redbirds got easy matches early. So the tournament, as it's doing its Swiss narrowing thing, puts it in a place where it does that. That said, that is why Redbirds still have not been able to beat challenging enough opponents, because it thought they were weak, so it gave them some opponents. But the tournament itself, with how it's structured, is of course going to figure it out, because this week it has no choice but to put them against 2 of the other 8-0 teams, who they will probably beat. Pizza Pirates, honorable mention. MA Minutemen, nice one. Okay. You've noticed that Meklo, top tier Smash player, often goes into losers bracket only to win finals and then grand finals. It can happen. It can absolutely be done. I didn't understand how going into losers could be beneficial, but I see it now. Yeah, and that would be in reference to the Mystery Machine's path here. It doesn't really necessarily work out to your favor, because ultimately you've managed to avoid teams and such, and it can get you a little bit out of trouble. But in that final week, and sometimes in that second to final week, you're going to have to play relatively serious teams. Like, Esports at UC Davis, we talked about them. They were 6-2, I think we discovered. And Kent State, I think we said was, let me pull my notes up real quick. 5-3? Yeah, 5-3. So somewhat serious teams. I suspect, I mean, we can see that they're better than these teams. They beat them. Hey, that means we get to call them better. But definitely in the last week, they're going to have to play up against, well, other 7-1 teams. And they haven't proven that they could handle 7-1 teams. And if they could handle 7-1 teams, was there a need for this maneuver in the first place? Sort of becomes the question there. That said, it can help. I mean, they could get a situation where I don't know how strong Mystery Machine is. I have not scrimmed against them. They could end up in a situation where they catch one of the weaker 7-1 teams and one of the stronger 7-1 teams. They get the win off one of the weaker ones that when otherwise they might have been in a situation like Northeastern where they get hit twice by two of the absolute best teams in the tournament, and then they end up against a team who's, say, their equivalent that could go either way, and they get eliminated type thing. That could happen to Mystery Machine. This mostly avoids that. So that would be the tactic involved there. The real issue here is the Swiss bracket isn't long enough. It's 10 rounds, and 10 rounds should be enough to handle a Swiss bracket of about 300 teams, but it's only really going to be long enough if you're reseeding every match, and we don't reseed every match in this Swiss bracket. We reseed every 2 matches because it's set up to do weekend play on Friday and Saturday, play on Friday and Saturday, play on Friday and Saturday, and it's not reseeded after the Friday match because it wants to allow people to reschedule so that they can play on different days if that works better for both teams. Okay, that's going to do it. Again, if you guys have enjoyed the content, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't. Let me know if you'd like to see more collegiate content like this, and if you'd like to perhaps be on, talk about collegiate stuff, things like that. You're with a collegiate program, let me know. Reach out to me. Thanks, guys. Temporal out.